place on Earth has better weather.
Well, we continue to look at the Atlantic Basin. That includes the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. And it remains very quiet, just as it has through most of August and September. And so far, we're almost a week into October. And out in the Atlantic, we don't have a single system out there that offers any kind of a threat that we can see to turn into, say, a tropical depression or a tropical storm. We can illustrate that first, I think, by looking at the winds. Notice we still have a trough of low pressure down the western Atlantic, and then we have rather a massive trough of low pressure at upper levels extending all the way from high latitudes right down to the tropics. Now, the net effect of such a trough as that out in the mid-Atlantic would be not to allow any system to develop out here in the east of it, even though we have a high pressure ridge there and come across. It's just not going to happen. Now, we do have one system here southeast of Bermuda that we continue to watch with some interest. We have actually a little low pressure system there, but it's moving fairly rapidly toward the east. And looking at the visible satellite pictures this afternoon, the center of that little circulation has become exposed, that is, out from underneath all these deep clouds, and that's a situation we know isn't going to develop further. We're still looking at upper level westerly winds from the northwest now, actually, to the western Caribbean, and the western Caribbean is a prime area of some development this time of year. We're getting a little bit of a ridge in the Gulf of Mexico, which we haven't seen before, and we do have some concentration of showers in the western Gulf, but nothing there that seems to be developing or is expected to develop. Now, this is a low pressure center we're talking about. To be sure, it does have quite a concentration of clouds and showers there, but it is moving toward the northeast, and it is moving actually now away from Bermuda and certainly away from the United States. And although we can't see it on this infrared picture, this circulation center is down here southwest of all these deep white clouds, and that's a situation that we just wouldn't expect to see any further development with that kind of a flow at upper levels and so on. Now, in the Caribbean, south of Jamaica, this is Honduras and Nicaragua there, we have some showers and some concentrations of showers actually, but that northwest wind just is not going to allow anything to develop there. Now, we had some interest out in the Atlantic last week and last weekend with a tropical wave that was coming in, but that is being pretty well taken care of now by these southwesterly winds to the eastern side of this trough. And even though down here, farther in the intertropical convergence zone, we see some concentration of showers, we can see by the cloud plumes that we have strong southwesterly winds there, and therefore no likelihood or really any chance of development. So all in all, we don't see anything out in the Atlantic right now that offers any kind of a threat. So we'll turn our attention to the East Pacific, which has had its share, certainly, of tropical storms this year. We're already up to Pauline now. And this is a hurricane. It became a hurricane this afternoon. It had been a tropical storm, but the National Hurricane Center's latest advisory that came out at 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time has elevated this now to a hurricane. And when we look very carefully right there in the center, we can just see the beginning of an eye. But what we haven't seen is any movement. It has been just about stationary this afternoon, hasn't gone anyplace. Top winds are 75 miles an hour. This center is 500 miles to the southeast now of Acapulco at 12.2 north and 94.1 west. Now, the movement's expected not to move very much at all for the next 12 hours, to be stationary, and then to move very slowly toward the northwest after that, and take the better part of 2 or 3 days to get up as far as the coast of Mexico. So we would advise people along the coast there around the Gulf of Tehuantepec to monitor this, but right now it's coming up there very slowly. We do think it's going to increase, though. There's a pretty good chance we think this will be quite a bit stronger hurricane than it is now. It may even get up close to being a major hurricane with sustained winds 110 miles per hour or higher. This is what the latest visible satellite picture looks like. Right there you can see the circulation center, and it is counterclockwise rotation, of course, showing up very, very well. And as we colorize the tops and show you where the highest tops are, and those are depicted by the bright reds, we can see a little bit of a lighter red in there. That's the warm spot near the center, and that represents the developing eye of this hurricane, Hurricane Pauline. Well, we brought Olaf back to life here after having been gone for several days, but it is a depression, not a tropical storm. It's a weak depression. Top winds 35 miles an hour moving toward the east and not expected.
The Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better
This tropical update is sponsored by the Home Depot, where low prices are just the beginning.
Thanks for tuning in. Mike Bono here in the studio alongside Bob Stokes this hour, and Greg Gentile has been our director as we're looking at the winds, the upper level winds. And it's been a little quiet in the Atlantic so far this season, and now that we're getting later in the season, upper level westerlies and upper level troughs, that's when the wind turns counterclockwise, and this would be about 40,000 feet and moves from west to east. That usually puts the damper on tropical development. We haven't had a whole lot anyway, but sort of a frontal band with a tropical disturbance in it, moving across almost the central Atlantic now. This one's on the move. Unsettled weather in the Gulf near Texas, and we've been looking at a tropical wave that seems to be getting picked up by wind out of the southwest, even at lower levels now, out in the middle of the Atlantic. Our eyes have been peeled to a low of tropical origins out here over the Atlantic Ocean, and Bermuda being right about here, so even Bermuda is out of the woods on this one right now. But there seems to be some sort of a circulation, but now winds around it coming in from a drier, cooler direction seem to be dragging the clouds around that circulation. Pretty cold cloud tops and tropical sort of characteristics to it, so it's been on the borderline of being a tropical depression for a couple of days, but it probably won't get much more intense than this, although you never know over these warm waters. They just pick up a little bit of heat and somewhat favorable upper level conditions, and bingo, you have a depression, sometimes a storm. But again, it's headed out toward the center of the Atlantic, and if it were to get a name, it would be a technicality, but not really any problems to land masses. We could see the tail end of that up here, and our upper level trough again oriented this way. Ahead of the trough, the air usually rising, and that often on the warm side of the jet stream as well. So things getting a boost out here with some thunderstorm activity. Haiti showing up here, and even Puerto Rico, a little less than yesterday maybe, but it's still around. On the other hand, there's a ridge of high pressure at upper levels over Central America. Now you're on the east side of the ridge here, and there is some diverging wind flow up aloft, and that's adding lift and increased thunderstorm activity, but not a really favorable spot for tropical development. And as we go out on further east, we have some tropical waves that seem to be quieting down rapidly. The Pacific pretty active though, and Pauline, which wasn't even classified last night at this time, a little later became a depression, became a storm in the wee hours of the morning, and now Pauline is up to hurricane strength. Sound familiar? It's been happening a lot in the eastern Pacific this year, these rapid intensifications, and we don't know how far it'll go, but we have had storms that have gone from very little to major hurricane very quickly in the eastern Pacific, although this is close to land. Olaf was out here about a week ago, never got this intense. 75-mile-an-hour winds nearly stationary, but center is stationed southeast of Acapulco, about 500 miles. As we put the infrared photography in motion, we notice that red area. That's a high, cold cloud top, and it's almost circular now. And you can even see the pinwheel effect. There is rotation out there, clearly visible. So it looks like it's developing an eye, and not quite as red, not quite as cold, right in the middle, and it probably will get even stronger, possibly a major hurricane. Which way is it going? We've had diverging computer guidance on this one, but the best estimate right now is to move it slowly northward over the next few days as it intensifies. The Mexican government not having put out any advisories yet, but if it starts moving closer to land, they will. Also, we have the remnants of Olaf on the map, not really looking that strong, 35-mile-an-hour winds. You remember Olaf around the Gulf of Tehuantepec a few days ago. In fact, starting to move eastward and losing steam very, very rapidly. Convection, high cloud tops, and intense rainfall is really limited right now with Olaf. And then we have Tropical Depression number 3C, 500 miles east-southeast of Hilo. That's not too far from Hilo, moving west at 14, but this one looks like it's losing its punch as well. If it stays over warm water, it could have a chance of developing, but it's pretty weak and certainly no threat to the islands right now. Your local forecast is coming up next.
Earth has better weather.
Time now to take a look at what's going on in the tropics. We'll take a look at the Pacific and the Atlantic, and the Atlantic is where we start out, where things have been certainly very quiet this season, with a few exceptions, and they're rather quiet out there right now. Not a lot going on. As we take a look at our big picture here, we've got one wave moving through the Atlantic, but that has lost much of its convection, an area of low pressure that's sort of merging with a front, and that's not posing any immediate threat, moving off to the northeast as a matter of fact. And also watching what's going on in the Gulf and in the Caribbean, not much tropically speaking, but as we head in the eastern Pacific, notice this area of anticyclonic flow aloft. That is helping a hurricane strengthen right here. Pauline, we'll take a closer look at that coming up. Into the Atlantic we go first of all, and we're watching this area of low pressure southeast of Bermuda. It is moving to the northeast. The circulation is and has been rather well defined. However, it is merging with a front, and that's going to tend to lessen the possibilities that it will develop tropically. And again, it is moving off to the northeast away from the U.S., away from Bermuda. So we'll continue to watch it, but at this point, not looking very promising. As we head into the Caribbean, we don't see a lot going on here. Tropically speaking, again, we've got some convection, some cloud cover, but nothing really impressive, again, tropically speaking. Also, watching a wave, again, that's moving through the Atlantic, but that has lost some of its convection, and at this point, not showing any real promising signs. But what is a little more interesting is what's going on in the eastern Pacific. Hurricane Pauline. And the latest in on this is now centered at 12.6 north, 94.2 west. That puts the center about 475 miles southeast of Acapulco. The winds are now up to 100 miles per hour. That's up from, I believe, 75 in our earlier report. Moving off to the north-northwest at 3 miles per hour. And this is showing some real strengthening signs. You can see it on our satellite view, becoming much more impressive on our satellite view here. We've got a lot of deep convection. That's what the darker reds and the oranges indicate, the deep convection, showing signs of strengthening, and it looks like strengthening may continue. Again, moving off to the north-northwest, and may eventually impact some of the same areas that were affected by Olaf. So we'll have to watch this rather closely. At this point, it seems not terribly favorable that it's going to make it over into the Gulf of Mexico. We'll have to continue to watch it, however, and of immediate concern is the impact it's going to have on Mexico. And again, it is showing some real signs of strengthening, so of certainly of concern for interest in Mexico here. We'll have to watch it rather closely, and stay tuned to the Weather Channel. We'll continue to keep you updated on the strengthening hurricane. Also watching Tropical Depression Olaf, now moving off to the southeast, but expected to eventually move off towards the northeast. Not expecting any significant change in intensity with Olaf, and again, it's expected to remain a depression over the next few days. We'll have to watch it, however, and we'll keep you posted on the latest on all the goings on here in not only the Atlantic but in the Pacific as well. One final area we want to show you is tropical